I want you to get together.
Hello everyone. So I want to make a video just keeping you guys up to date with where I am right now with the book and its progress. I don't have a script for this video, I'm just going to wing it. I'm just going to literally show you guys where I'm up to, what I've been thinking about, what I've been reading, and just generally how the process is going. I like to keep you guys in the loop. So to do this, I'm just going to quickly swap my screen to show you guys what I've been working on. So, here it is. Here's the book as it stands. Um, to be honest, how many words have I written so far? What about 95 pages I have here, it says down in the bottom corner. And if I just, let's say, go to where I've recently stopped writing. Okay, and if I just highlight it all, let's have a look. It just keeps going. Get to the top of this page and let's see. So if I just highlight it, all the actual writing that's worth anything, and let's go to tools, word count. Well, that can't be right. I've highlighted more than 24 pages of 95. Let's display word count while typing. There we go. So if it says I've written 52,457 words there. So let's say 50,000 words altogether, not counting all the little extra bits which aren't finished and the random little paragraphs I've saved here and there as we scroll through for later chapters. So about 50,000 words down, about 90 pages in already. And what I have accomplished so far in the, 3-4 months now since I began this is, Section 1 is completed, which is establishing the foundation. And Section 1 constitutes 10 chapters, which is in the side here, ending with where demons come from and how they are the disembodied spirits of Nephilim. Prior to this, the other 9 chapters are literally a breakdown summary of biblical history and the origin of the Nephilim and the many different viewpoints and theories on that story. So I'm not saying anything is 100% the the God-given truth on the matter, but I have shared all the perspectives and ideas and interpretations out there to explain the origin of the Nephilim. And I personally, I think what I've constructed here is a good worldview, a biblically sound worldview. There's a few controversial takes in there, some hot takes we'll call them, but I do obviously have the disclaimer that this is a hot take, and obviously more information can always come to light and new theories will always appear, but I think what I've explained here best explains the origin of the Nephilim. And if you watch my live shows regularly, and if you've been on my channel for a while, you'll know I've read quite a few chapters from this opening section. And to be honest, in this opening section down the side here, these first 10 chapters, there isn't really much about clowns at all, a lot about the Nephilim themselves, but not really much about how they looked or how they're related to clowns yet, But that's what Section 2 is about, what I'm on currently. So currently I'm on Section 2 now. Chapter 11, it has been written, the first draft. It's, what's that, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, about 4.5 pages worth there for Chapter 11. And this is basically going through biblical understandings and descriptions, including extra biblical text, but everything within the biblical canon and narrative. That gives us information on what angels looks like. And that's what this is about, the first section here about the clown. And then the second chapter, in section 2, chapter 12, is the biblical descriptions of the Nephilim. So I've just finished writing this recently, about 2 weeks ago. And this is quite a fair chunk again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 4.5 pages again, just going through all the biblical information we can pull from the canon and the extra canonical texts, which give us any information at all on what the Nephilim would have looked like. And I want to use the biblical understanding as the base, before we build on top of that using sources outside of biblical canon, from mythologies or in other cultures all around the world. So that was a fun one to write, and I think I've created quite a good image there in that. I might read this section actually. at the end of this, just to share with you guys a part of the book. But what I'm writing currently is quite fun. It's Modern Encounters with Nephilim. So this is what I've been focusing my time on for the past week, and I've had to put this down into subheadings. I've got 4 so far. This is all subject to change. It might develop as I write and go on. But the first section is North American skeletons, and wow, there are so many skeletons in mounds all over North America. Giant skeletons, and all of them were found around the 1800s period, and all of them have mysteriously vanished every time the Smithsonian gets involved. It's an interesting one to research. For this section, even this one subheading alone, I've gone on for a long time. It's, what's that, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pages worth of just talking about the skeletons and of the giants that have been encountered in the north of America. And then after that, I have currently just almost finished, but I'm not. I'm about halfway through finishing this chapter, or this subheading to chapter 13, should I say, which is talking about Bigfoot and the wild men found all around the earth as well. So big, tall, hairy men, monster-like ape creatures, found all over the earth. And it's funny because it doesn't take long, I said here, with a quick online search, it's easy to compile the numerous folk tales and legends of tall, hairy beast men roaming the mountain ranges and caves, having an elusive and menacing presence for all those who encounter them. And it really is. I'm literally hopping from country to country here, and they all have their own myth describing the exact same tall, hairy monster. So Bigfoot of the Pacific Northeast region of America is not the only case of this monster, and naturally, I think this is a continuation of the Nephilim genetic corruption from before and after the flood, just going through to the modern age. So when we're talking about modern encounters, which is what chapter 13 is about, I couldn't leave Bigfoot out of it. I had to throw it in there. And of course, if you've followed my work, you'll know that the wild men of Europe are in fact a huge part of the whole theory of the Nephilim look like clowns. It is from the wild men of Europe we got the inspiration for the Harlequin. It's based on a wild man figure known as Helikins from French and German mythology, and from there that character became the Harlequin within the shows that travelled through Europe with these circuses that kind of came out of Rome, through Italy, up through France. And it's Harlequin is based on the wild man, and the wild man was literally a Nephilim entity. And then from the Harlequin, we had a development into the modern day clown. So the clown literally has its roots in representations of the wild men, which I've made a case for here as the Nephilim. So the clown is literally a representation of the Nephilim, even historically speaking and artistically speaking. So that's what all this is about, So chapter 14, after I've finished all these modern encounters, I'll make sure to mention the Giant of Kandahar. I've got that written down here. And I'll probably give a breakdown of cryptids as well, the mysterious weird creatures found all over the earth that are like chimera hybrids of a kind. Let's talk about, I don't know, the Mothman, for example. Just one example off the top of my head, And I do believe the cryptid phenomena are probably talking about the genetically engineered humans just before the flood. Those human beings who decided to change themselves by mixing themselves with other kinds of animals through the help of, obviously, the Nephilim and the fallen angels who worked with them and taught them how to do this. And I do think that these cryptids are probably just these deformed X-Men mutant humans still living in the present day, And, so that's chapter 13, And I had a bit of a mix-up of my order recently. So as you know, chapter 1 is biblical history. And then section 2 just goes straight to the clown. That wasn't always the case. I originally just had section 2 be 3 chapters, just basically describing what did they look like, And then section 3 was going to be the clown, which would start here in chapter 14. But I figured it's getting a bit convoluted, so I've just removed that extra section and made it all one thing. Because even from chapter 11, biblical descriptions of the angels, I've started to get into describing where the clown comes from in terms of imagery and aesthetic, and how we get where its roots are. Its roots are in, obviously, the parents of the Nephilim, which were the serpentine, psychedelic-looking angels, mixing with the other parents, the women of Cain, who I've theorized in this section here about the mark of Cain perhaps being white skin, which is why we get the white skin of a clown mixed in with the Nephilim imagery, and the fiery red hair probably comes from the parents, which is the angels, the seraphim angels. So I think these two chapters, biblical descriptions of the angels and the Nephilim, is a good foundation to start with when talking about the clown itself, which is what section 2 is about. So yeah, I think I've made the right choice here. But yeah, chapter 14 is going to be cool. I'll begin on that pretty soon. I already have quite a few things noted down here, but to get all this information, I've actually, the money you've been sending to me on the fundraiser for the GoFundMe here, I've actually used some of this to purchase quite a few books. Here's just some of them. Ignore the boys here, that's from years ago. But I already had a copy of the Genesis Conspiracy, a hard copy of that, so I haven't needed to use that on Kindle. But I have bought this book, which is Giants on Record, which is very interesting. And this is where I got most of my chapter 13 information from, talking about the skeletons found all over America. So I've been reading this one. And honestly, this is just a huge compilation of giant bones being dug up all across the Americas. All the clippings from newspapers as well are in here, and it's an epic read, to be honest. They don't necessarily come at it from a biblical perspective, but their information is wonderful. It's definitely it's a treasure trove of information. They've done a lot of work to compile all these articles and all these stories from the 1800s to the 1900s. So that's been a great help. And so that's one book I've been reading. If I go back here, there's another one. Go back to the library. The Pantomime Life of Joseph Grimaldi. So this is about the first proto-clown of the modern age. The one that came off the back of the 1800s towards developing the modern image of a clown we have today. I actually have, if I go to just some of my files here, if I have them on here, books, yeah, I've actually got some other books as well. So I actually have the memoirs of Joseph Grimaldi here. And I've been reading through this. It was actually edited by, I think, Charles Dickens. It's the one who compiled all this. And I've been reading about his life and times, of Joseph Grimaldi in his literal memoirs. And God, this guy led a sad life. It wasn't great. But you learn a lot. You learn a lot about the history of the performing clown during this era, and how he mingled with all these people who played a huge part in popularizing the modern clown. And his life is a roller coaster, as all these performers were. But obviously Charles Dibdin is brought him in here quite a lot. There's a lot of suspect characters along the way. There's a lot of information in the memoirs themselves. But I also found that this book I bought through Kindle, someone else has put their own work into doing the biography of him, and yeah, he's included a lot of extra information which wasn't kind of mentioned in the memoirs themselves. So that's been fun to read, and that's going to play a huge role in what we're talking about in the book next. The origin of the clown. And I'll probably go a lot into literally all the way up to Grimaldi in this and to the modern day. There's another book as well, which gives a lot of information about, again, the literal satanic origins of the Harley Quinn. And obviously the rituals of the performance involving these characters is a substitute for Dionysus, and there's lots of dark, esoteric, trippy information here about the first Harlequinades and the first characters within these shows, and the origins being, obviously, like I said, Harlequin or Harlequins or Helikins here, which was a giant of sorts, which was a proto-version of Dionysus, which was a wild man. It's all fascinating stuff, and that's what's to come next. Then we'll talk about, it's all listed here. Secret societies, the Shriners are going to get mentioned here. We'll be talking about the breakdown of the character of a clown in chapter 16. And I'll literally explain how each feature is supposed to represent something to do with the Nephilim, something I've done many times on the channel. We'll talk about the circus and the Hat Man. We'll talk about DMT jesters and sacred clowning, you know, how some of these ancestor cultures have their own personal thing they call a clown themselves. Then section 3 is the big one. Section 3 is going to be going through every single continent, one at a time, and breaking down all of the traditions that venerate the Nephilim in their rituals. Whether they call them Nephilim or not is irrelevant. All this section 3 is basically going to be a compilation of everything my channel's been talking about, you know, in the Nephilim Look Like Clowns playlist. If I can view the bloody playlist. Here we go. So, you know, in this, I've basically been compiling all these folk traditions and cultures from all over the place. We've got the Sri Lankan masks here and the Rakshasas of India. We've got the black and white Wuchang impermanence of Thailand and Taiwanese culture. And we've also got, obviously, Ogmios of Celtic culture. We've got the totem poles, the shamans of North Korea and the Mudangs as well. We've got, I don't know, literally everywhere has their own culture. And I've literally made an entire series dedicated to showing all of these things. So I'll definitely be compiling a lot of the things I shared in these videos into this section. The Wanjinas of Australia as well. Like I said, the Wildmen of Europe is a big one. We've got the Portuguese Caritos religions as well, and their Wildman representations. It's all over the place. We've got Morris dancing. We've got most of the North American tribes have their own folk traditions. Africa is rife with them. Almost every single cultural group in Africa has their own bizarre ancestor worship cultures and representations of Nephilim and wild men themselves. It's going to be a big one. That's going to take some time, but it's going to be very fun and packed with information once I write that one out. And then the last section, section 4, I'm going to basically come to the modern era and do all the pop culture stuff. I'm going to talk about clown murderers and perverts. I've been looking into it. I'm actually making a video right now about murderous clowns, people who dressed like a clown and committed atrocities throughout history. That one's going to be an interesting video, and obviously I'll fill the book with that. I'm going to talk about the 2016 clown sightings and the ones that were a bit earlier in the 80s as well. We'll talk about the fear of clowns and coulrophobia. We'll talk about that infamous multicoloured collective, which I like to discuss quite a lot. I've already posted here the script from my video on that. If you haven't seen that video, it's where is it? It's this one here, number 18. I've basically just posted the script for that one in there as a placeholder. It'll need a bit of editing, obviously, but I've already discussed them, so that's kind of an easy one to just round off. I'll talk about the clown in film and TV and how it represents the Nephilim subconsciously and symbolically. We'll talk about the music industry and how they channel demons. I've just made a video about that, so I'll probably expound a lot of the points I just made in my recent video about the music industry again in this section of the book. So it's going to be a fun one, you know, and I don't know how deep I'm going to go into the pop culture stuff. I kind of want to keep this focused on the anthropological side of things, the cultures, the folk traditions, and how then we can just apply it to that lens to modern day media quite easily. I'll probably make that clear in the book, but I don't know if that's going to be my hyper focus. Maybe for a second book, I can expound more in the future on all the pop culture stuff, because I think there is so much to reference that it would constitute a whole book in its own right. So maybe I should save some room for a sequel, eh? So maybe I'll do that, but I'll definitely touch on it all and give my overarching theories and opinions on all of those industries. And then the final section will talk about how we can protect ourselves, how it's all really fundamentally aimed at proving God exists. That's what my work is for, and to prove the spiritual war we find ourselves in, and then just some rounding off conclusions. So the book is pretty much mapped out. 35 chapters, and I'm currently finishing off chapter 13. So I'm almost halfway there, if not probably halfway there. A lot of these will be a lot longer than others. Some of them a lot shorter than others, these chapters as I go along. I've got quite a lot of reading to do, and I've read quite a bit already, and it's been fun. That's where obviously some of your donations have gone to. Some extra biblical texts here, Book of Jubilees. A lot of them are online, luckily, and you can just go and type in some of these apocryphal texts online and read them quite easily. So you don't necessarily need digital copies. I've managed to find a full PDF version of Gary Wayne's book, which has come very much in handy because I can just quickly find key terms by searching in the toolbar. So it is useful to have digital copies, I've found. A lot of these pages I've written so far, I have been rewriting a lot of them and going back. So section 1, all these 10 chapters are pretty solid. I've rewritten them all about 5 times each already, and I shouldn't be doing that. I should just power through and just keep writing roughly every chapter, and then go through at the end and rewrite. But I'm just not. I'm too much of a perfectionist to do that. I find it really hard, but I'm trying to push through right now. I would say, as far as section 2 goes, maybe these aren't the most refined of writing yet. I have only had like a second pass at most of them. I've not really done a thorough editing yet, but we'll get there. So there's the progress, guys. I'm rounding off chapter 13, and I have about 35 chapters in all planned out. So progress is happening. It's getting there. And I think I'll read some of what I've been writing recently to you guys. Maybe I've already read the biblical descriptions of the angels to you guys in one of my live shows, so I'll leave that one out. Let's see, maybe biblical descriptions of the Nephilim. Should I go through this one? Sure. This one's probably more related to clowning as it is, so maybe I should read this one to you guys for now. Again, like I said, this is a first draft. A lot can be added and taken away from this yet. I'm just trying to sculpt an image, of the Nephilim through these works. But I hope you enjoy this little reading. If you do want to support the book, guys, like I said, go to the GoFundMe here. £100, as this recent person here has donated, will get you a free signed copy of the book mailed to them once published. That's where this money is going towards. It's going towards helping me fund writing the book and also getting books out for the pre-orders. And also a little bit does go towards helping feed me and my family while I'm writing this book as well. But it's been wonderful. The support has been unbelievable. So I'd like to thank all 51 of you who has donated so far. And obviously, I think about 20 or maybe about 20 of you guys will be getting a signed copy of the book for what you've donated, which is wonderful. So if you want to get involved, guys, you can find the links down below and help support me there directly. That would be wonderful. But for now, I'm just going to read to you Chapter 12, Biblical Descriptions of the Nephilim. And while I'm doing this, in the background, I'm just going to play some slideshow images for you to enjoy. Chapter 12. When using only biblical text to determine the visual nature of the Nephilim, we are unfortunately only given inferences, hints, and ambiguous descriptors. It appears that what they looked like was not as important as what they did. This is also true of the Christian ethos in general, so it's hardly surprising there's a lack of descriptors. You really have to comb through the books and verses across the canon and Apocrypha to gain the smallest details. This chapter will showcase this information so we can create a biblically grounded base template on which to add the extra features we will discover from sources outside of biblical canon. The one thing we can already cross off our list of biblical descriptions is the sheer height and mass of these abominations. We know from Genesis 6 that the pre-flood Nephilim were giants, and we also know from Numbers 13:33 that the people of Israel considered themselves grasshoppers compared to the beings in the lands of Canaan post-flood. The degrees to which they towered over their human subjects varied greatly, as they appear to get smaller with each passing iteration. But the fact that they were incredibly tall is not contested. Flavius Josephus was a 1st century Jewish historian born in 37 AD. While describing the Nephilim, who Israel expelled from the lands of Canaan, he seemed to passively mention that the bones of these creatures were still on display during his time. Josephus describes them as unlike anything else in existence, and not even remotely resembling a typical human being. Quote, "The Wurtil then left the race of giants, who had bodies so large and countenances so entirely different from other men, that they were surprising to the sight, and terrible to the hearing. The bones of these men are still shown to this very day, unlike to any credible relations of other men." End quote. I find it interesting that Josephus made the statement that not only were they surprising to witness, but also terrible to the hearing. Wayne also examines this description from Josephus and speculated as to why this was a descriptor, while also attempting to make his own image of the Nephilim. To quote Gary Wayne, "From further examining post-Diluvian Nephilim nations, we can construct an accurate picture of Nephilim appearance. First, let us look to define Anak, which means long-necked, i.e. a giant. That the sun touched their necks because they were so long, like those of snakes. Zamzumims were noisemakers, which likely accounts for Josephus accounting Nephilim as fearsome to the hearing. Author Frank Joseph describes the godlike giants having voices like Atlas's, when he bellowed from the depths of his mountain. Nephilim were believed to have a frightening snake-like appearance, just as Josephus and others have stated. They were terrible to behold, just as Amim translates as inspiring fear, and Rephaim translates as causing one's heart to grow weak at a glance." End quote. The Emites, or Emim, was the Moabite name for the Rephaim. They are described in the book of Deuteronomy as being, quote, "a people great and many and tall as the Anakim." End quote. They were defeated by the Moabites, who then occupied their land. The Emim are also mentioned in Genesis 14:5, and as Wayne mentioned, the name means inspiring fear or the dreaded ones. The singular of Emma, means horror or terror. So this must mean they were truly terrifying and monstrous. One additional feature that will become a recurring theme when discussing accounts of giant encounters is the number of digits on the appendages of the giants. If we read 1 Chronicles 26, we are told they had more than a normal human being. Quote, "There was again war in Gath, where there was a man of great stature, who had 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot, 24 in number, and he also was descended from the giants." End quote. The colours and patterns on the skin of the giants no doubt varied greatly by nature of their colourful serpentine fathers. Though Noah was not a Nephilim himself, he was compared to one at birth because of his bizarre heavenly appearance. With this odd description of baby Noah by his father Lamech, we get a small hint as to what the Nephilim looked like through tangential comparison. Enoch himself recounts the tale in the book of Enoch and the book of Noah. Quote, "And after some days my son, Methuselah, took a wife for his son Lamech, and she became pregnant by him and bore him a son. And his body was white as snow, and as red as a rose, the hair of his head as white as wool, and his dendema, long curly hair, beautiful. And as for his eyes, when he opened them, the whole house glowed like the sun. And his father Lamech was afraid of him, and fled, and went to Methuselah his father. And he said to him, I have begotten a strange son. He is not like a human being, but looks like the children of the angels of heaven to me. His form is different and not like us. It does not seem to me that he is of me, but of the angels." End quote. Noah was clearly divine in nature. As the future for all of mankind, it makes sense that such focus was put into his creation by God. Yet at first glance, Noah's appearance made his father Lamech, of Seth's pure lineage, fear that he had begat a Nephilim child, like those of the angels mixing with the daughters of Cain. Noah had bright, red and white patterned skin, with shining large eyes, and brilliant white, curly hair. We can safely assume from this description that the Nephilim must have had very similar features too, for Lamech to make the comparison. There is a possible explanation for the white skin motif, typical of all Nephilim found within other apocryphal texts, called the Book of Lamech of Cain. It is claimed that this translation was unearthed from the Vatican vaults for scholarly study in 2019, and was simply suppressed for its blasphemous subject matter and uncomfortable assertions about beloved biblical figures. Though it is not said specifically what the issue is, I imagine it had something to do with Noah's wife being described as a whorish descendant of Cain, who regularly drank blood, had sex with angels and giants, and practiced sorceries before marrying Noah, hiding her past and repopulating the earth after the flood. This document recounts the descent into madness and depravity of Lamech, the seventh generation descendant of Cain, not the father of Noah, as he befriends a Nephilim giant named Uval, who teaches him to control a serpent-like monster called Leviathan. The dynamic duo go on to use the giant sea serpent to slaughter people, as he looks for answers as to how Cain managed to create offspring. His questions were based on the common simplistic argument that Adam and Eve were the only other humans around, so it shouldn't have been possible. Unsatisfied with the answers, possibly being told of pre-Adamite mentioned earlier in section 1 of this book, and unable to get God's attention due to the curse of Cain, Lamech goes on to start his own religion, worshipping the Leviathan. Throughout the verses, Lamech repeatedly refers to the mark in which all descendants of Cain have been cursed with. Here are the opening verses, 1 verses 2 through 4, in which this was made clear. Quote, Cain, the forefather of Lamech, who was marked with leprous whiteness, for God had said, Whomever slays Cain shall have vengeance visited upon their head sevenfold. As Abel's blood cried out from the ground, the same leprous whiteness was made a sign that was visited upon all of Cain's descendants, as it was their inheritance for 7 generations. With this marked inheritance, Cain's descendants sought to do all that was wicked on the land in the sight of the Lord, for they had been marked by him. For the descendants of Cain had received unto themselves the damnation which was their fair portion for Cain's sin. End quote. So, according to this, all descendants of Cain were marked with sickly white skin, like that of a leper or a dead person. This is also mentioned in verses 3:23, 8:1, 8:61, 9:2, and 10:7 of the same book. This would explain why the Nephilim also had white skin. As we already know, it was the daughters of Cain who had sex with the angels, passing on Cain's genetic mark and giving birth to the Nephilim. This book says that the daughter of Lamech, Naamah, wasn't as white as the other descendants of Cain. Though she was a pure descendant, the curse is said to only be valid for 7 generations. She was the 8th. So was able to marry Noah by hiding her true corrupted origins and past actions, by no longer bearing the mark of the white leprous skin. Then it goes on to say that out of all the sons of Noah and Naamah, Ham was the only one who showed the white skin trait of Cain, in verses 8:61. As we have already established, it was through the lineage of Ham we get the rebellion and the Nephilim corruption reintroduced into the post-flood world. Yet the implications of this particular book being factual is that all of mankind has the serpent seed corruption of Cain within them, from the Mars lineage back to Cain. This could be an explanation for why much later in history, the 2 children of Isaac were not the same in visage. Jacob was described as a plain man who lived as an ordinary tent dweller, bracket civilized, while Esau was born covered in bright red hair, and grew to be a cunning hunter in the wilds, whom other men feared whenever he approached, not unlike the descriptions of Cain, who, according to the book of Jasher, was killed by Tubal-Cain and Lamech while hunting, mistaking him for a beast in the field. If the mark of Cain and the rebellious nature is now encoded into all of humanity, as the book of Lamech claims, as a form of a recessive gene, then on occasion these traits would manifest. I imagine that with the passage of time, these traits are so interbred and diluted that we wouldn't find such dramatic expressions of the mark like we found in Esau anymore. However, on occasions we still find humans with deformities such as horns, tails, webbed digits, and albinism. So it does beg the question as to where these genetic traits truly originate, when considered with this biblical historical perspective. So the base image we are sculpting here for the Nephilim form is now partly coming into focus. According to biblical and extra-biblical sources, the Nephilim were incredibly tall monsters with booming voices that distilled fear into whomever heard them. Their countenance was terrifying to witness, and their bodies were shaped unlike anything else that is, or has ever been on the face of the earth. They had extra fingers and extra toes, though it is not made clear what the dexterous advantage of this deformity would have been. In a modern context, I imagine the words per minute typing speed was incredible. Through extra-biblical sources, we can read that they also had brilliant and sickly white skin, with the colour red and possibly other colours patterned throughout, like Noah, like a reptile or other brightly coloured animal. They also had hair that may have been white like Noah or crimson red like Esau. Finally, just like Noah was described again, they had large eyes that glowed, possibly through a form of bioluminescence, divine power, or simple reflectivity. As discussed in previous chapters, mankind did change themselves to be like the Nephilim by mixing themselves with animals. The forms these beasts took would have been innumerable, and many of these abominations, along with the giant offspring of fallen angels, were considered gods among men. In fact, world history mythologies are rife with not only stories of giants created by heavenly winged creatures descending to earth, but it is also inundated with monstrous hybrid creatures and fanciful fairy folk that have no logical reason to be in existence. Nevertheless, fairy tales recounting these monsters contending with great and powerful heroes of the time continue to be told even to this day. The worlds often described in these mythologies resemble something akin to J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, or the MMORPG, the World of Warcraft. The Book of Giants found with the Dead Sea Scrolls explains clearly how these beasts came to be, and the type of genetic manipulation that took place during the 6th generation of Jared up until the Flood. Summarized interpretations of the fragments 1Q23 fragments 1 and 6 and 4Q531 fragment 2 says that 200 angels seized 200 donkeys, 200 asses, 200 sheep and rams of the flock, 200 goats, 200 beasts of the field from every animal and from every bird, for experiments in inbreeding with humans and all types of miscegenation. As a result, the intelligent monsters were created alongside the abominable beasts, due to the mixing of man and animal. These thinking monsters gather with the giants, showing they had a self-awareness and language, for answers as to why they were dreaming of a coming flood that would kill them all. These creatures are not Nephilim in their truest sense, though like the Nephilim, they are abominations. They are the result of genetic kinds being mixed as an affront to God's intended design. So they are in a way just like the Nephilim, but they are not the direct result of a union between angels and human women. These lesser monsters appear to mainly be the result of true Nephilim mixing their corrupted genes with humans and animals with the help of their angelic parents. The Nephilim who did this unspeakable sin against the beasts and mankind can be broken down into three categories and are described in R. H. Charles' 1913 translation of the Book of Jubilees. Quote, "And they begat sons, the Nephilim, and they were all unlike, and they devoured one another. And the giants slew the Nephil, and the Nephil slew the Elio, and the Elio mankind, and one man another. And every one sold himself to the work, iniquity, and to shed much blood. And the earth was filled with iniquity. And after this they sinned against the beasts of the bird, and all that moves and walks on the earth." End quote. This passage tells us that the original Nephilim went on to procreate with the daughters of Cain, just as the Watchers did, and created a lesser Nephilim called the Nephil. In turn, the Nephil then went on to do the same thing, and create an even lesser form of Nephilim called the Eliu or the Elio. All of these races were giants, with part angel DNA, and therefore were not the monsters described in the Book of Giants, though I'm sure they were hideous in form. These are those who took their part in creating the many monsters by defiling animals with their seed. Such abominations of popular history include, but are in no way limited to, the fairy folk of the Celtic mythos, the numerous terrible children of Echidna in Greek mythology mentioned in chapter 7, and the many cryptids of all shapes and sizes found in legends of all cultures on every continent. I will cover some of these cryptids in the next chapter, but first I want to make clear that what I consider to be the Nephilim, and to define my terminology so there's no confusion going forward. The first creatures I am referring to when I use the term Nephilim are the original offspring of fallen angels and human women. Second, I also consider the offspring of the Nephilim and human women, the Nephil and Elio, to be Nephilim too, albeit in a lesser form, as they still maintain angelic genetic makeup. Third and last of all, I also believe those humans who decided to mix themselves with animal DNA in order to be like the true Nephilim are in a sense, quote, faux Nephilim, who, thanks to nature's psychedelic colour palette, will also have picked up clownish features and wild mutations, just like the human-serpent hybrids they tried to emulate. As an umbrella term, I will be using the word Nephilim to refer to all three categories going forward. And that's the end of chapter 12. Let me go on to modern encounters from there. So I hope you enjoyed that little reading, guys. Reading back to myself there, it could do with a little bit of neatening up. The flow kind of loses itself towards the end. Again, I haven't done any really rewriting of that yet. I think a few things need tweaking. I did a few tweaks as I was reading. You heard me stumble a few times because I realised the phraseology was just off or wrong. And I think I've discovered a few extra things here and there which I want to add to this maybe. And an extra viewpoint and perspective. But yeah, that's that chapter so far. I hope you enjoyed that reading. I hope you get something from this, and I hope you're up to date now with where I am with the book, so you know exactly how the progress is going. Obviously, the people who've helped funded me so far, I hope this gives you a clear picture of the progress for yourself. And again, if you do want to help fund the book, go straight to the GoFundMe. The link's down below, and yeah, donate, guys. Like I said, there's the pre-order system on there, so you can get involved and get behind this. Any donation at all, I will give you a special thank you in the book. Your name will get mentioned. But again, if you do want a free signed copy of the book, it will be £100 or more. So that's the deal going there, guys. But again, any donation at all, you will get a special thanks, of course. So there you go, guys. That's the update. That's the book so far. I will be going away for a couple of days from Sunday, so I probably won't pick up writing this again maybe until next week sometime. I have a lot of work on right now with my photography business, so I will be doing a lot of that too. But steady progress, it's going along, and yeah, guys, I'm going to leave it there. Thanks for listening, and as always, God bless.
I want you to get together